Stop your savage songs, Upper Sergeant Clayton bellowed, his boots stomping through the moonlit circle of Paiute children as he tore Chenoa's drum from her hands and smashed it to splinters. In the Nevada dusk of 1930, her voice faltered but her heart surged, shielding her frail grandfather Wovoka from Clayton's threats of arrest. A desperate shove sent Clayton stumbling, branding Chenoa a fugitive for assaulting an officer. Now, with torches closing in, she faced a heart-wrenching choice. Silence her stories to save Wovoka, or sing on for her people's legacy, risking everything. Chenoa, a 28-year-old Paiute storyteller, carried the weight of her tribe's history in every song, her voice a lifeline to their past in the harsh Nevada of 1930. Living with her grandfather Wovoka, a revered spiritual leader watched closely by authorities, she battled the scorn of white townsfolk who labeled her a troublemaker. Haunted by memories of a boarding school that tried to strip her identity, Chenoa wrestled with who she was, torn between her heritage and the world that rejected it. Her quiet love for Daniel, a white miner, flickered like a forbidden flame, threatening both their safety and Wovoka's honor, while the government's threats to jail her for rebellion pushed her to the edge of an impossible choice. The moon hung low over the Nevada foothills, casting a silver glow on the circle of Paiute children huddled around Chenoa. Her voice wove an ancient song of their ancestors, each note trembling with pride. The children's eyes sparkled, their small hands clapping softly to the rhythm of her drum. A breeze carried the scent of sage, wrapping the moment in a fragile peace. Then, hoofbeats shattered the calm. Upper Sergeant Clayton and his men stormed in, their lanterns slicing through the dusk. Clayton's voice boomed, accusing Chenoa of spreading rebellion through her songs. He snatched her drum and smashed it against a rock, the splintered wood scattering like broken dreams. The children gasped, some scrambling behind boulders, their whimpers piercing Chenoa's heart. She stood tall, her fists clenched, refusing to let fear silence her. Clayton sneered, his men fanning out, kicking over baskets and trampling the sacred ground. Chenoa's chest tightened with rage and sorrow, her voice lost in the chaos, but her resolve hardened. This was her people's story, and she would not let it die under Clayton's boots. Clayton towered over the scattered circle, his face twisted with contempt. He pointed a gloved finger at Chenoa, calling her a savage who dared defy the law. His men rummaged through the children's belongings, tossing woven mats into the dirt. One officer found Chenoa's songbook, its pages filled with Paiute verses, and handed it to Clayton. With a mocking laugh, he tore a page and let it flutter to the ground, grinding it under his heel. Chenoa's throat burned, but she bit back her anger, knowing any word could worsen things. Clayton leaned closer, his breath sour, and warned that her grandfather Wovoka would rot in jail if she didn't stop her gatherings. A child's sob broke the tension, and Chenoa's heart ached to comfort them, but she stayed rooted, eyes locked on Clayton. He spat into the dust, declaring her songs a threat to order, and ordered his men to mark the area as forbidden. As they mounted their horses, Clayton's final glare promised retribution. Chenoa knelt, picking up a shard of her drum, her fingers trembling with defiance and dread. Wovoka emerged from the shadows, his frail frame leaning on a carved staff. Despite his age, his eyes held a fierce light as he faced Clayton. The sergeant scoffed, shoving Wovoka's shoulder, nearly toppling him. Chenoa rushed forward, her arms shielding her grandfather, her voice sharp as she demanded Clayton leave him alone. A young officer stepped toward Wovoka, his handcuffs glinting, but Chenoa pushed him back, her heart pounding. The children, hiding nearby, watched with wide eyes, their fear mirroring her own. Wovoka whispered for her to stay calm, his voice steady despite the pain in his chest. Clayton mocked their bond, calling it a pathetic show of defiance. and signaled his men to hold their ground. Chenoa's pulse raced, her body a barrier between Wovoka and the officers. She felt the weight of every stare, from the children to the men with guns. Wovoka's hand squeezed hers, urging patience, but her blood boiled at the injustice. As Clayton's men circled closer, she vowed silently to protect her grandfather, no matter the cost. The air grew thick with tension as Clayton barked for Chenoa's arrest. An officer lunged, grabbing her wrist, his grip like iron. She twisted free, her elbow catching Clayton as he stepped between her and Wovoka. He stumbled, scraping his hand on a rock, and roared that she'd assaulted him. Blood trickled from his knuckles, fueling his fury. Chenoa froze, her breath shallow, realizing the danger she'd unleashed. Clayton raised a hand to stop his men, his eyes narrowing with a cruel promise. He accused her of attacking an officer, a crime that would see her chained. The children's cries grew louder, and Chenoa's heart splintered, torn between shielding them and standing by Wovoka. Clayton dusted his coat, his voice low and venomous, swearing she'd regret her defiance. He ordered his men to retreat, their lanterns fading into the night. Chenoa sank to her knees beside Wovoka, her hands shaking as she clutched his arm, the weight of her actions crashing over her like a desert storm. Chenoa helped Wovoka back to their tent, her steps heavy with guilt. Inside, she checked his arms for bruises, her fingers gentle but trembling. Wovoka's eyes softened, and he told her he was proud of her courage, though his voice was weak. Villagers arrived, their faces etched with worry, whispering about Clayton's threats. Word of the clash spread, and some elders shook their heads, blaming Chenoa for provoking the law. She bit her lip, the sting of their words cutting deeper than Clayton's insults. Lila, her young apprentice, slipped through the crowd, her eyes fierce with loyalty, and urged Chenoa to keep fighting. Chenoa forced a nod, but doubt gnawed at her. Had she endangered Wovoka for the sake of a song? The tent felt smaller, the walls closing in as voices outside debated her fate. She clutched a broken drum shard, its jagged edge a reminder of the night's violence. As the villagers dispersed, Chenoa sat by Wovoka, her heart a tangle of fear and determination, knowing the fight was far from over. In the dim glow of a lantern, Wovoka's voice filled the tent with stories of Paiute resilience. He spoke of ancestors who faced starvation yet kept their songs alive, his words a balm to Chenoa's frayed nerves. She confessed her fear of losing him, her voice cracking as she imagined Clayton's men returning. Wovoka smiled, his weathered hand covering hers, and said he'd lived long enough to see her strength bloom. He urged her to trust her heart, to carry their history forward no matter the cost. Chenoa's tears fell, each one heavy with love and dread. She promised to protect him, though the path ahead felt like a cliff's edge. Wovoka mentioned the wind singer, a mysterious Paiute who once guided their people through crisis, and Chenoa's mind flickered with hope. Maybe this figure could help her now. As Wovoka drifted to sleep, Chenoa sat awake, her thoughts churning. She couldn't let Clayton win, but saving Wovoka meant risking everything she held dear. Lila burst into the tent at dawn, her arms full of bread and dried herbs. She recounted how the village children still hummed Chenoa's songs, their voices a quiet rebellion. Her words lit a spark in Chenoa's chest, easing the ache of the previous night. Lila declared Chenoa their hero, a keeper of Paiute spirit, and vowed to stand by her. Chenoa's eyes softened, but she warned Lila of the dangers, her voice heavy with worry. Lila brushed it off, her youthful fire unyielding, and suggested gathering whispers from the village to track Clayton's plans. Chenoa hesitated, fearing for Lila's safety, but the girl's resolve was unshakable. They shared a quiet moment, braiding sage into bundles, the act grounding Chenoa's racing heart. Lila's faith reminded her why she sang, why she fought. As Lila left to rally the children, Chenoa felt a fragile hope stir, though the shadow of Clayton's threats loomed larger than ever. Daniel's knock came soft but urgent, his face pale under the brim of his miner's hat. He'd heard of the clash from town gossip and rushed to check on Chenoa. She poured out the night's horror, her voice trembling as she spoke of Wovoka's frailty and Clayton's cruelty. Daniel's jaw tightened, his own struggles with the town's prejudice surfacing. He admitted his feelings for her, his words halting, laced with fear of the danger their bond could bring. Chenoa's heart fluttered, but she pushed the warmth aside, too raw to trust it. Daniel offered to dig for clues at the Sterling mine, where he worked, suspecting Clayton's ties to the company. His hand brushed hers, a fleeting promise of support, and Chenoa felt a flicker of strength. As he left, the weight of their secret love pressed against her, a fragile light in the growing darkness. She watched him disappear into the dawn, praying his loyalty wouldn't cost him everything. A group of Paiute elders gathered outside Chenoa's tent, their voices low but firm. They urged her to stop her storytelling, warning that Clayton's wrath could burn the whole village. One woman, her face lined with grief, said her son had been harassed by officers since the gathering. Chenoa tried to explain that her songs were their history, their soul, but the elders' fear drowned her words. A few nodded, understanding her heart, but most insisted on silence for safety. Chenoa's chest ached, feeling the community she loved slip away. Lila leapt to her defense, her voice sharp, but an elder hushed her, calling her reckless. Chenoa stood frozen, the sting of rejection like a slap. As the group dispersed, she wandered to the edge of the village, the wind carrying their doubts. She clutched her songbook, its pages worn but unbroken, and swore to herself that she'd find a way to keep her people's voice alive, even if they couldn't see it now. By the creek, Chenoa sat alone, the waters murmur a faint comfort. Memories of the boarding school flooded back, where teachers had mocked her language and cut her braids. The pain fueled her resolve. She wouldn't let Clayton erase her people's story. Lila found her, breathless, with rumors that Clayton frequented Sterling's mine. Chenoa's eyes narrowed, a plan forming. She declared she'd keep singing no matter the cost, her voice steady with newfound fire. Lila beamed, promising to spread word of Chenoa's defiance to the village. Chenoa handed her a woven bracelet, a token of trust, and asked her to watch for Clayton's men. As Lila darted off, Chenoa traced the creek's edge with her fingers, feeling the pulse of her ancestors. The fight was hers now, and though fear clung to her, she stood taller, ready to face whatever Clayton brought next. Chenoa wandered through the pine-scented forest at dusk, her heart heavy with the village's doubts. A glint caught her eye, a stone carved with swirling Paiute words, a song about stolen lands. Signed Wind Singer, it sent a shiver down her spine, as if the forest itself was watching. She traced the letters, her fingers trembling with awe and fear. Back at the tent, she showed Wovoka, whose eyes widened, recalling tales of the Wind Singer, a shadowy savior of their people. He warned that the song hinted at a threat to their sacred ground. Chenoa's pulse quickened, sensing a hidden truth in the words. She tucked the stone under her blanket, vowing to unravel its message. As night fell, she heard rustling outside, her breath catching, but only an owl hooted in the dark. The stone's weight pressed against her thoughts, a call to action she couldn't ignore. She whispered a prayer to her ancestors, asking for courage to follow the Wind Singer's trail, wherever it led. Chenoa met Daniel by the creek, the stone's song burning in her mind. She recited its verses, her voice low, and his face tightened with suspicion. He spoke of Sterling's mine, where he worked, and its push to claim land near Paiute territory. Chenoa's eyes flashed, connecting the song's warning to Clayton's threats. Daniel offered to watch for strange dealings at the mine, his voice steady despite the risk to his job. She hesitated, fearing for his safety, but his quiet nod gave her strength. They parted under the stars, her heart torn between gratitude and dread. Back home, she sketched the stone's words in her songbook, each line fueling her resolve. A distant coyote howled, echoing her restless spirit. Chenoa clutched the book, knowing Daniel's help could uncover a truth bigger than them both. But the cost might be more than she could bear. Under a sliver of moon, Chenoa crept toward Clayton's camp, her heart pounding like a war drum. She hid behind sagebrush, watching officers patrol with lanterns. A cart rumbled in, unloading crates marked with strange symbols. Slipping closer, she ducked into Clayton's tent, her breath shallow. Inside, she found a glass vial of murky liquid and a stack of letters. Her hands shook as she read one, its words chilling. "Clear the Paiute land for silver." She scribbled the words on a scrap of cloth, her pulse racing. A shadow crossed the tent flap, and she dove under a table, heart in her throat. The officer passed by, oblivious, and Chenoa slipped out, clutching the vial. She ran back to the forest, the night swallowing her footsteps. The vial's weight felt like a curse, its secrets a spark that could ignite her fight or burn her world down. Chenoa burst into the tent, her voice trembling as she showed Wovoka the vial and cloth. The letters revealed Clayton and Sterling's plan to poison Paiute food, forcing them off their land. Wovoka's face paled, his hands gripping his staff as he cursed the greed that threatened their people. Chenoa's stomach churned, imagining children eating tainted bread. She paced, her anger warring with fear, knowing Sterling's power reached far. Wovoka urged her to find more proof, his voice steady but strained. Lila arrived, her eyes wide as Chenoa shared the truth, her fists clenching with rage. They sat in silence, the lantern flickering, each lost in the weight of the discovery. Chenoa's mind raced, picturing the village sick and scattered. She vowed to stop Sterling, her heart a storm of fury and resolve, but the path ahead loomed dark and treacherous. Chenoa's hands shook as she told Daniel and Lila the full horror of the plot. Daniel's face darkened, recalling miners falling ill after handling chemicals. Lila's voice broke, thinking of her little brother eating the town's rations. Chenoa's chest tightened with guilt, wishing she'd seen the signs sooner. Daniel swore to dig deeper at the mine, his eyes fierce with loyalty. Lila suggested a secret gathering to warn the village, her courage lifting Chenoa's spirit. They clasped hands, a fragile pact against a monstrous enemy. Chenoa's thoughts swirled with images of poisoned wells and empty homes, her fear for Wovoka sharpest of all. She hugged Lila, whispering thanks, and watched Daniel vanish into the dawn. Alone, she knelt by the fire, praying for strength, her heart heavy with the lives now resting on her shoulders. The vial sat like a silent accuser, urging her to act before it was too late. Clayton's men swept through the village, their boots kicking up dust as they hunted Chenoa. Wanted posters with her face appeared on trees, offering coin for her capture. A villager, trembling, told an officer Chenoa often hid by the creek. She fled deeper into the forest, the vial and cloth tucked inside her shawl. Thorns scratched her arms as she crouched in the thicket, her breath ragged. Lila found her at dusk, slipping her a loaf of bread, whispering that Clayton's men had searched her tent. Chenoa's heart sank, picturing Wovoka alone, defenseless. She clutched the vial, its cold glass a reminder of the stakes. Night fell, and she moved to a cave, her body aching but her mind sharp. The forest seemed to whisper warnings, and Chenoa prayed the shadows would keep her safe. Her defiance burned brighter, but fear for her people gnawed at her soul. Daniel trudged home from the mine, his face bruised from Floyd's fists. Clayton's deputy had cornered him, demanding Chenoa's hiding place. Daniel stayed silent, earning a punch that split his lip. He staggered to Chenoa's cave, blood staining his shirt, and collapsed beside her. She cleaned his wounds, her hands gentle but her eyes blazing with anger. Daniel admitted he'd seen Floyd with Sterling's men, confirming their alliance. Chenoa's heart twisted, hating that her fight had hurt him. He gripped her hand, vowing to stand by her, his voice hoarse but firm. She wanted to push him away, to keep him safe, but his stubborn loyalty warmed her. They sat in the cave's dim light, the world outside growing darker. Chenoa's fear for Daniel mingled with her resolve, knowing each step deeper into this fight bound their fates tighter. Lila slipped through the village, asking elders about Clayton's movements. Floyd spotted her near the camp, his knife flashing as he grabbed her arm. He hissed that her questions would get her killed, his breath hot on her face. Lila's knees shook, but she lied, claiming she was just passing by. Floyd shoved her away, his eyes promising violence, and ordered a guard to tail her. She ran to Chenoa's cave, tears streaking her face, and confessed her terror. Chenoa held her close, guilt flooding her for pulling Lila into danger. Lila wiped her eyes, insisting she'd keep fighting for their people. Chenoa gave her a woven cord, a symbol of their bond, and urged her to be careful. As Lila left, Chenoa's heart ached, seeing her own younger self in the girl's courage. The cave felt colder, the weight of her choices pressing down like stone. Wovoka's coughs echoed in the tent, his face pale as Chenoa spooned him broth. She checked their food stores, her hands shaking, fearing poison had already reached them. A healer brought herbs, but Wovoka's strength faded, his breath shallow. Chenoa sat by his side, her voice breaking as she sang a childhood lullaby he'd taught her. He smiled weakly, his hand finding hers, and said she was the heart of their people. Tears fell as she begged him to hold on, her fear of losing him like a knife in her chest. Wovoka spoke of the wind singer, urging her to seek his guidance. Chenoa nodded, though despair clawed at her. She lit a sage bundle, its smoke curling upward, and prayed for a miracle. His frail form seemed smaller, and Chenoa's resolve hardened, vowing to save him and their legacy, no matter the cost. Chenoa curled up in the cave, the vial's cold glass pressed against her palm. Images of poisoned children and a shattered village haunted her. She traced the cloth-scribbled words, each one a dagger of truth, but felt powerless against Sterling's reach. Lila crept in, her face soft with worry, and sat silently, her presence a quiet comfort. Daniel arrived, whispering that he'd seen Sterling's engineer Vance with crates of chemicals. Chenoa's heart sank, her guilt swelling for dragging them into this storm. She questioned if her songs were worth this pain, her voice barely a whisper. Lila touched her shoulder, reminding her of the children who still sang. Daniel's eyes locked on hers, promising they'd fight together. Chenoa took a deep breath, her despair easing, and clutched the vial tighter. She stood, her shadow tall against the cave wall, ready to face the darkness, her heart a flickering flame of hope. Chenoa sat by the cave's entrance, her heart heavy as she watched the stars fade. She told Lila she'd stop her storytelling to keep Wovoka safe, her voice cracking with defeat. Lila's eyes dimmed, but she nodded, understanding the cost of Clayton's threats. Chenoa trudged to the village, whispering her decision to a few elders, their sighs of relief cutting her like thorns. Children glanced at her, confused, their silence louder than any song. She returned to the tent, her fingers tracing the broken drum, guilt choking her for betraying her ancestors. Wovoka stirred, his weak voice urging her not to lose faith, but Chenoa felt like a shadow of herself. She hid her songbook under a blanket, fearing its words might tempt her to defy her own vow. The weight of her choice pressed down, each step away from her stories a wound to her soul. As dawn broke, she knelt by Wovoka, promising to protect him, though her heart wept for the legacy she'd silenced. Clayton's patrols eased around the village, their lanterns dimming as Chenoa's gathering ceased. Wovoka rested, his coughs softer, his face less pale under Chenoa's care. She fed him broth, her hands steady but her chest tight with shame. A villager stopped by, thanking her for calming the storm, his words bitter in her ears. Chenoa forced a smile, hiding the ache of her sacrifice. Lila slipped into the tent, whispering that she'd taught the children a song in secret, keeping Chenoa's spirit alive. Chenoa's eyes welled, torn between gratitude and fear for Lila's boldness. She hugged the girl, her heart lifting slightly, but the quiet village felt like a grave. Wovoka squeezed her hand, his gaze steady, reminding her their fight wasn't over. Chenoa lit a candle, its flicker a faint echo of hope, but the shadow of her silenced voice loomed, urging her to find another way to resist. Daniel found Chenoa by the creek, his voice fierce as he refused to let her surrender. He spoke of miners whispering about Sterling's shady deals, their distrust growing. Chenoa's eyes sparked, her despair easing at his defiance. He urged her to keep fighting, promising to search the mine for proof of Clayton's schemes. Her heart wavered, torn between Wovoka's safety and her duty to her people. Daniel's hand brushed hers, his warmth a lifeline in her storm of doubt. She agreed to one more push, her voice low but firm, trusting his courage. They planned to raid Clayton's camp again, their whispers blending with the creek's murmur. Chenoa's fear lingered, but Daniel's resolve kindled a fire in her. As he left, she clutched a pebble from the creek, its smooth weight a reminder of their shared fight, her heart beating with fragile hope. Under a starless sky, Chenoa and Daniel crept toward Clayton's camp, their breaths shallow. They hid behind crates, watching guards pace with rifles. Daniel pointed to a tent glowing with lantern light, its flaps loose. Chenoa slipped inside, her pulse racing, and found another vial of murky liquid and a ledger. The pages listed shipments of supplies to Paiute rations, coded words chilling her blood. She stuffed the vial in her shawl and copied the ledger's notes, her hands trembling. A guard's cough echoed outside, and Daniel yanked her behind a barrel, their hearts pounding as boots passed. They fled into the night, the vial's weight a heavy promise. Chenoa's mind spun with the ledger's secrets, her fear for Wovoka sharp but her resolve sharper. Back in the forest, she clutched Daniel's arm, whispering thanks, her heart alight with the hope of exposing Clayton's evil. Chenoa and Daniel rode to a dusty town, the vial and notes hidden in a sack. At a small post office, they mailed the evidence to a federal agent, Chenoa's letter pleading for justice. Her words poured out, detailing the poison meant for her people, her hand shaking with urgency. Daniel watched the clerk stamp the package, his face tight with worry about Sterling's reach. Chenoa's heart thudded, hoping the agent would act swiftly. They lingered by the post office, the desert wind carrying their whispered fears. She pictured Wovoka's frail form, praying he'd live to see their victory. Daniel squeezed her shoulder, his quiet strength steadying her. As they rode back, the horizon glowed with dawn, a fragile promise of change. Chenoa's chest ached with hope and dread, knowing their gamble could save her people or doom them all. She vowed to keep fighting, the vial's truth her guiding star. Days later, a letter arrived from the federal agent, its words cold, insufficient evidence to investigate Sterling. Chenoa's heart sank, her hands crumpling the paper. Daniel cursed, suspecting Sterling's bribes had silenced the agent. She paced the tent, her anger boiling at the betrayal, her hope unraveling. Lila slipped in, her face falling as Chenoa shared the news, her small fists clenched. Wovoka, propped on blankets, urged Chenoa to take their fight to the public, his voice weak but fierce. Chenoa's tears fell, her guilt swelling for failing her people. She hugged Wovoka, his frail frame a reminder of the stakes. Daniel suggested finding a newspaper, his eyes burning with defiance. Chenoa nodded, her despair hardening into resolve, vowing to expose Sterling's crimes. The tent felt smaller, but her spirit grew, ready to face the next battle, no matter how steep the cost. Whispers spread through the village. Chenoa's fight had failed. Elders turned away as she passed, their eyes cold with blame. A mother forbade her son from singing Chenoa's songs, fearing Clayton's wrath. Chenoa's chest tightened, each rejection a stone on her heart. Lila ran to her, begging the villagers to trust Chenoa, but their fear drowned her pleas. Chenoa stood by the fire pit, the village's silence deafening, her spirit bruised but unbroken. A child slipped her a daisy, whispering that he still sang her songs, and Chenoa's eyes welled. She knelt, promising him she'd keep fighting. Lila's voice broke through, vowing to rally the young ones. Chenoa hugged her, drawing strength from the girl's fire. Alone later, she clutched her songbook, its pages a lifeline, her heart heavy but resolute, knowing she'd lost her people's trust but not their future. Lila found Chenoa by the creek, her arms full of old song sheets. She spoke of children singing in secret, their voices keeping Chenoa's legacy alive. Chenoa's heart lifted, tears brimming at the thought of her songs enduring. Lila urged her to hold a hidden gathering, to rekindle the village's spirit. Chenoa hesitated, picturing Clayton's men storming in, but Lila's fierce eyes swayed her. They sat weaving sage, Lila's stories of the children's courage warming Chenoa's soul. She gave Lila a carved bead, a token of their bond, and agreed to plan the gathering. Lila's smile was a spark, igniting Chenoa's fading hope. As Lila ran off, Chenoa sang softly, her voice trembling but strong, feeling her ancestors' strength. The creek's flow seemed to echo her resolve, pushing her to fight on, even as fear whispered of the dangers ahead. Chenoa woke to a new stone by her cave, its carved song signed by the wind singer. The words spoke of a hidden truth in an abandoned mine, a beacon in her darkness. She clutched the stone, her heart racing with hope and fear. She told Daniel and Lila, their eyes wide as she recited the verses. Daniel knew the mine, a crumbling site Sterling once used, and offered to guide her. Chenoa's stomach knotted, fearing a trap, but the wind singer's call felt like fate. They planned to go at midnight, their whispers tense with urgency. Chenoa left a note for Wovoka, her words a prayer for their safety. She braided her hair, each twist a vow to uncover the truth. As they set out, the stone's weight in her pocket was a steady pulse, guiding her through the night, her heart alight with the promise of answers. Chenoa, Daniel, and Lila crept into the abandoned mine, their lantern casting eerie shadows. Dust choked the air as they found a locked door, its hinges rusted. Daniel pried it open, revealing crates of papers and vials. Chenoa's hands shook as she read a ledger, detailing Sterling's plan to seize Paiute land with poisoned rations. Lila gasped, finding a map marking their village for clearance. They stuffed papers into a sack, their movements frantic as a distant rumble echoed. Daniel urged them out, fearing a collapse, and they fled, the sack heavy with truth. Chenoa's heart soared, the evidence a weapon against Sterling, but fear for Wovoka tempered her joy. Back in the cave, she hugged Lila and Daniel, their shared triumph, a fragile light. The papers spread before them, each word a step toward justice, but the mind's shadows lingered, whispering of the fight still to come. Chenoa and Daniel rode through the desert dawn, the sack of mine papers heavy on their backs. They reached a bustling town, its newspaper office a beacon of hope. Chenoa handed the editor their evidence, her voice steady as she detailed Sterling's poison plot. The editor, A grizzled man skimmed the ledger, his eyes narrowing with interest. She pleaded for a story to save Paiute lives, her heart pounding with urgency. Daniel added tales of sick miners, his words raw with truth. The editor promised to investigate, but warned it would take days. Chenoa's chest tightened, picturing Wovoka's fading strength, but she nodded, clutching Daniel's hand. They left the papers, the office's ink-stained air thick with possibility. As they rode back, the sunrise painted the sky gold, a fragile promise of justice. Chenoa whispered a prayer, her hope fierce but shadowed by fear that Sterling's power might silence even the press. Vance, Sterling's engineer, stormed into the abandoned mine, his lantern revealing the rifled crates. He cursed, realizing Chenoa had taken damning evidence, and ordered his men to burn the rest. Flames roared, swallowing papers and vials, the smoke curling like a warning. Word of the fire reached Chenoa through a miner, her heart sinking as hope crumbled. She sat in the cave, the stolen ledger her only weapon, its pages now precious. Lila's eyes welled, fearing their fight was lost, but Chenoa gripped her hand, vowing to press on. Daniel paced, his face grim, suggesting they find more proof before Sterling struck back. Chenoa's mind raced, picturing the village poisoned, her resolve hardening against despair. She lit a sage bundle, its scent grounding her, and prayed for the windsinger's guidance. The cave's shadows danced, urging her to act, her heart a storm of fear and defiance. Clayton's fury erupted as he learned of the mine's breach. He nailed new wanted posters across town, Chenoa's face glaring from each one. His men scoured the forest, their dogs barking through the night. Chenoa hid in a rocky hollow, her breath shallow, the ledger pressed against her chest. Lila slipped her a blanket, whispering that Clayton's patrols circled closer. Chenoa's heart ached, picturing Wovoka alone, his coughs echoing in her mind. She scribbled a note to Lila, urging her to watch the village, her hand trembling with fear. A twig snapped nearby, and Chenoa froze, her pulse racing as a guard passed inches away. She clutched the ledger tighter, its secrets her lifeline. As dawn broke, she moved deeper into the hills, her body weary but her spirit unbroken, vowing to evade Clayton until the newspaper struck. Floyd ambushed Daniel on a dusty trail, his fist slamming into Daniel's jaw. He demanded Chenoa's hiding place, his knife glinting. Daniel spat blood, refusing to speak, his eyes defiant. Floyd tied him, dragging him to Clayton's camp, where Clayton beat him, roaring for answers. Daniel's silence earned more blows, his body slumping but his will firm. Floyd suggested using Daniel as bait, a cruel grin spreading. Clayton locked him in a guarded tent, his bruises a map of loyalty. A miner saw the attack and whispered it to Lila, who ran to Chenoa, tears streaming. Chenoa's heart shattered, guilt flooding her for Daniel's pain. She vowed to save him, her voice fierce, though fear clawed at her. Lila offered to scout the camp, her courage a spark in the dark. Chenoa hugged her, praying Daniel would hold on, her resolve a fire against the growing storm. Lila crept to Clayton's camp at midnight, her heart pounding like a drum. She hid behind barrels, spotting Daniel's tent, his shadow slumped inside. With a stolen knife, she cut his ropes, her hands trembling as he stirred. Daniel's eyes widened, his voice a hoarse whisper of thanks. They slipped out, but Floyd's shout split the night, his boots thundering after them. Lila pulled Daniel into the forest, branches scratching their faces as they ran. Floyd fired a warning shot, the crack echoing, and Chenoa, waiting nearby, froze, her breath caught. They dove behind a boulder, hearts racing, as Floyd's men swept past. Lila clung to Daniel, her fear raw but her spirit fierce. Chenoa found them, her relief flooding as she hugged them both, guilt and gratitude warring in her chest. They hid, in a thicket, the night their shield, vowing to fight on together. Chenoa gathered the village in a hidden valley, her voice trembling as she announced a ceremony to reveal Sterling's plot. Lila spread word, her whispers rallying elders and children alike. Chenoa wove a new song, its verses exposing the poison, her heart pounding with purpose. As dusk fell, villagers arrived, their faces wary but curious. She stood on a rock, singing of betrayal and survival, her voice rising like a desert wind. Eyes widened, gasps rippling as she showed the vial, its murky truth silencing doubts. A mother wept, clutching her child, and elders nodded, their trust returning. Chenoa's heart soared, feeling her people unite, but fear lingered, knowing Clayton could strike. She called for defiance, her words a spark, and the valley echoed with their resolve. As stars appeared, she felt her ancestors' strength, her soul alight with hope. The ceremony song still rang when villagers shared stories of sick children and tainted food. An elder vowed to guard the village, his voice firm with newfound fire. Chenoa's eyes shone, her heart swelling as mothers clasped her hands, their gratitude heavy. Lila led children in a quiet chant, their voices a thread of hope. A young man offered to scout for Clayton's men, his courage infectious. Chenoa knelt with an elder, promising to protect their land, her voice thick with emotion. The valley buzzed with plans, the Paiute spirit rekindled. She hugged Lila, her pride fierce but worry gnawed, picturing Wovoka's frail form. Daniel stood by her, his presence steady, vowing to fight beside them. As the crowd dispersed, Chenoa felt the weight of their trust, her resolve a beacon, ready to face Sterling's wrath. Floyd's men crashed into the valley, their rifles raised, shattering the ceremony's peace. Children screamed, scrambling behind rocks as Floyd fired into the air. Chenoa shouted for calm, her voice cutting through the chaos, urging villagers to shield each other. Wovoka, weak but defiant, staggered forward, his staff raised to block Floyd. Floyd shoved him, and Wovoka fell, his head striking a stone, blood pooling. Chenoa screamed, rushing to him, her hands cradling his face as tears fell. She cursed Floyd, her voice raw as he laughed, leading his men away. Villagers lifted Wovoka, carrying him to safety, their faces grim. Chenoa's heart broke, guilt and rage warring as she held his hand, praying he'd survive. The valley lay silent, the air heavy with loss, but her resolve burned, vowing vengeance for her grandfather's pain. Chenoa sat by Wovoka in the tent, his breathing shallow, blood staining his brow. She cleaned his wound, her hands trembling, whispering songs to keep him near. The healer shook her head, warning his time was short, and Chenoa's tears fell, her heart fracturing. Wovoka stirred, his voice faint, urging her to fight for their people. He spoke of a vision, ancestors guiding her, his eyes bright with faith. Chenoa clung to his words, her love for him a fierce anchor. She lit sage, its smoke curling, and begged the spirits to spare him. Lila crept in, her face pale, promising to guard the tent. Chenoa kissed Wovoka's hand, a resolve hardening through the pain, vowing to honor his sacrifice. The night stretched on, each cough a dagger, but her spirit rose, ready to face the storm for him. A new stone appeared by the tent, its song from the wind-singer pointing to a cave with Sterling's secrets. Chenoa's heart leaped, hope cutting through her grief. She told Daniel and Lila, their faces lighting with purpose as she read the verses. Daniel mapped the cave's location, his voice steady despite the danger. Chenoa packed the ledger, her hands steady, trusting the wind-singer's call. They set out at dusk, the desert air sharp, her heart pounding with Wovoka's words. Lila carried a lantern, her courage a spark, while Daniel scouted ahead. They found the cave, its entrance hidden, and Chenoa felt the ancestors' presence, guiding her. Inside, a chest held letters proving Sterling's crimes, her hope surging. She hugged her friends, their shared fight aflame, ready to wield the truth against their enemies. Chenoa penned a new letter, her words fierce as she detailed Sterling's poison plot. The cave's letters her proof. She and Daniel trekked to a larger newspaper office, the desert dust clinging to their boots. The editor, a sharp-eyed woman, read the evidence, her face hardening with resolve. Chenoa's voice shook, begging for a story to save Paiute lives, her heart pounding with hope. Daniel shared minor testimonies, his voice steady, adding weight to their plea. The editor vowed to publish, her pen already scratching notes. Chenoa's chest swelled, picturing Wovoka's pride, though fear of Sterling's reach lingered. They left the office, the city's bustle a stark contrast to their quiet fight. As they rode back, stars blinked above, a fragile promise of justice. Chenoa clutched the cave's letters, her spirit soaring, ready to face the storm with newfound allies. The newspaper's front page screamed of Sterling's mining scandal, its words a spark in the desert. Villagers clutched the paper, their whispers turning to cries of defiance. Chenoa read it by Wovoka's side, her heart racing as hope flickered. Lila ran through the village, sharing copies, her voice bright with triumph. Elders gathered, their eyes alight, vowing to stand with Chenoa. Daniel grinned, recounting miners' outrage at Sterling's lies. Chenoa's tears fell, relief mixing with fear of retaliation. She sang softly to Wovoka, his weak smile a beacon in her storm. The village buzzed with plans, their unity a shield against Clayton's threats. Chenoa stood taller, her voice steady, knowing the truth was spreading, but Sterling's shadow loomed, urging her to brace for his counterstrike. Sterling's rage boiled as the newspaper hit stands. He ordered Vance to destroy all traces of the poison, his voice sharp with panic. Vance's men torched warehouses, flames swallowing crates of chemicals, the smoke a dark omen. Word reached Chenoa through a miner, her heart sinking as evidence vanished. She paced the tent, the cave's letters, her last hope, their weight heavy in her hands. Lila's face fell, fearing Sterling's power, but Chenoa's eyes blazed, vowing to fight on. Daniel suggested rallying the village, his voice firm despite the setback. Chenoa lit a sage bundle, its scent steadying her, and prayed for strength. The village's trust felt fragile, but her resolve burned, a fire against Sterling's destruction. She clutched Wovoka's hand, his frail form urging her to act before their chance slipped away. Daniel stood before the miners, his voice ringing as he exposed Sterling's poison plot. Men gasped, some nodding, their illnesses illnesses now clear. A few shouted support, vowing to join Chenoa's fight, their fists raised. Others jeered, calling him a traitor, their loyalty to Sterling unshaken. The foreman fired Daniel, his face cold, but Daniel walked away, head high. He found Chenoa in the village, his bruises fading but his spirit bright, and told her he'd chosen her. Chenoa's heart swelled, her gratitude laced with guilt for his sacrifice. She hugged him, her voice soft, promising they'd win together. Lila cheered, her eyes sparkling, and handed Daniel a Paiute braid as thanks. Chenoa felt their bond strengthen, a lifeline in the growing storm, her resolve fierce as she planned their next move. The wind singer stepped from the shadows, his red scarf glowing in the moonlight. Chenoa froze, her heart pounding as he revealed himself, a former Sterling engineer, haunted by the poison plot. He spoke of witnessing the plan's birth, his voice heavy with guilt. He handed Chenoa a list of minor witnesses, their names a key to justice. She clutched the paper, her hope surging, tears brimming at his sacrifice. The wind singer promised to testify, his eyes fierce, ready to face Sterling's wrath. Chenoa thanked him, her voice trembling, feeling the ancestors' presence. Daniel and Lila stood by, their faces awed, vowing to support the plan. The forest seemed to hum, its whispers urging Chenoa forward. She tucked the list away, her heart aflame, ready to wield this new truth against their enemies. Chenoa called the village to Sterling's mining office, her voice a clarion for justice. Lila rallied families, her whispers spreading like wildfire, bringing elders and children. Daniel scouted the site, ensuring no traps, his face set with purpose. Chenoa wove a final song, its verses a cry against Sterling's crimes, her heart pounding. Villagers gathered, their banners high, demanding their land's safety. A few white townsfolk joined, their support a shock, their voices blending with Paiute chants. Chenoa stood on a crate, singing, her voice soaring, uniting the crowd. She held the cave's letters aloft, their truth, a beacon, her spirit fierce. Lila's eyes shone, her pride clear, as Daniel guarded the edge, ready for trouble. The air crackled with defiance, Chenoa's heart alight, knowing this was their stand. Villagers chanted Chenoa's song, their voices a tide against Sterling's greed. An elder shared his son's illness, cured by avoiding town rations, his words stirring hearts. Miners stepped forward, confirming chemical crates, their testimonies a hammer. A white shopkeeper apologized, his voice shaky, joining the Paiute cause. Lila led children in a dance, their steps a pulse of hope. Chenoa's tears fell, her heart swelling as the crowd grew, their unity a fortress. Daniel squeezed her hand, his eyes proud, vowing to protect them. The wind singer stood by, his scarf bright, ready to speak. Chenoa felt the ancestors' strength, her voice steady, urging the crowd to hold fast. The mining office loomed, its doors shut, but their resolve burned, a fire Sterling couldn't quench. Clayton stormed in with his men, rifles gleaming, his voice roaring accusations of riot. He pointed at Chenoa, ordering her arrest, his face twisted with fury. Villagers formed a wall, their bodies shielding her, their chants drowning his threats. The wind singer stepped forward, revealing his past, his voice clear as he detailed Sterling's plot. Miners echoed him, their stories of poison undeniable, Clayton's eyes darting with panic. A newspaper reporter scribbled furiously, his presence a shield against Clayton's men. Chenoa's heart raced, her voice rising, urging unity. Clayton lunged for her, but Daniel blocked him, the crowd surging, trapping Clayton in their tide. His men faltered, rifles lowering, as the truth's weight crushed their resolve. Chenoa stood tall, her spirit a storm, knowing victory was near. Federal agents arrived, their badges glinting, spurred by the newspaper's expose. They cuffed Clayton, his curses fading as villagers cheered. Sterling was dragged from his office, his face pale, unable to deny the cave's letters. The wind singer testified, his voice steady, joined by miners who'd seen the poison crates. Chenoa's heart soared, tears streaming as justice dawned. Lila hugged her, her laughter bright, while Daniel stood close, his relief clear. Elders raised their hands, praising the ancestors, their faith restored. Chenoa looked to the sky, feeling Wovoka's spirit, her resolve unbroken. The agents promised trials, their words a vow to end Sterling's reign. The crowd roared, their victory a beacon, but Chenoa's joy was tempered, knowing the cost still lay ahead. Clayton and Sterling faced prison, their plot exposed, the Paiute land saved. Chenoa stood in the village, her voice weaving new songs, honored by her people. Wovoka's breath stopped that night, his final smile etched in her heart, his sacrifice, a spark for her fight. She wept, burying him under the stars, her grief raw but her purpose clear. Daniel stayed by her, their love accepted, building a Paiute cultural center with Lila's help. Villagers joined, their hands weaving baskets, their songs echoing Chenoa's. She held the wind singer's scarf, its red a symbol of triumph, her heart heavy with loss but alight with hope. The desert bloomed, its winds carrying her ancestors' pride, urging her to sing on, her legacy a fire that Sterling's greed could never extinguish.